Sustainable Silicon Valley, as you probably know, is a nonprofit think and do tank that we involved in water use and reuse, air quality, mobility, and regenerative communities, and decarbonization in the Bay Area and beyond. And this is an example of beyond. This is the warming stripes. In this case, on the solstice, it was projected on the cliffs of Dover, and it shows kind of a picture of the big picture of what has been going on for the last 2,000 years with the industrial age on the right there, with all that red and dark and everything, and we're definitely looking to counteract or at least mitigate that. Some upcoming things in July, we have Sustainapalooza, a quote hybrid event, and hybrid defined at SSV as online one day and in person the next day. Will be in a Mitchell Park Center in Palo Alto. It's really a fun event. We will feature our carbon burgers and a whole lot of other things, and so you'll be hearing more about that. Also, in September, we will be doing probably our biggest event, Waterpalooza. It's a hybrid event, same kind of deal, online one day, in person at the Mitchell Park Center on the next day. And that should be a real big event because, you know, nothing's gone on involving water in California this year, right? So no, there'll be plenty to talk about. So one thing that came up just the other day was the release and announcement of grants totaling $52 million of new money from the EPA to 24 organizations. And I think Heidi Nutters will be talking more about that as well. And then speaking of Heidi, I'll do some quick introductions and then turn it over to Jackie Zipkin and kind of get out of the way. But Heidi is the Senior Program Manager at SF Estuary Partnership, and she leads climate resilience programming, including the Transforming Urban Water Initiative. So her focus areas are about collaborative process, advancing on-the-ground nature-based shoreline adaptation projects, and integrating racial equity into the partnerships projects. So I'll move over to Don Brown of Cargill. He's Assistant Vice President, Land Resource Manager for Cargill Salt in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's responsible for the company's real estate portfolio and interest in the Bay Area to ensure complex operational and non-operational objectives, not objections, are fulfilled in compliance with regional, state, and federal law. Don is also part of the team partnering with East Bay Dischargers Authority to enhance the processing and removing of mixed sea salts, which is a term of art that you'll take away from this, from Cargill's Newark Solar Sea Salt Facility. And prior to his role, Don actually just moved here somewhat recently from Minnesota, and he led Cargill's U.S. state and local government relations, and also served as a state tax counsel. So takes a different background to this. And so lastly, let me introduce Jackie Zipkin, who's the General Manager of the East Bay Dischargers Authority, which is a joint powers authority that efficiently and sustainably manages the discharge of wastewater for approximately 1 million East Bay residents to the San Francisco Bay. Prior to that, Jackie served as Manager of Environmental Services at East Bay MUD, and where she managed environmental programs, including the district's resource recovery and wet weather programs. So, and East Bay Dischargers is central to both of these projects. And so anyway, Jackie will grab the screen and take us away. So, hello, Jackie. You were in backstage. I saw.
I was waiting in the wings.
Right. Okay. So I will.
Okay.
Yeah. So everyone is with us now. I had been doing intros and things, which I guess you didn't hear, but
I heard most of it.
I spoke well of you all, and yeah, Jackie. Yeah. Why don't you set up the screen and go for it. I will.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Hide my self view. We can see you.
You can see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Apologies for the technical challenges this morning, but we appreciate everyone sticking with us, and we even picked up a few more people while we were figuring this out. So thanks for being here, and I'm really excited to be part of this this discussion today on East Bay Shoreline infrastructure projects. So I thought I'd start by just introducing who is EBDA, or the East Bay Dischargers Authority, because as Dennis mentioned, we are central to the two projects that we're going to talk about today. We are a joint powers authority made up of the cities of Hayward and San Leandro and the Castro Valley, Loma, and Union sanitary districts. So you can see on the right of the screen a schematic of our system. So we collect and discharge treated wastewater from San Leandro in the north to Newark actually in the south, and then there's a portion of the system that you'll see on later slides that goes east out to Livermore. So it's collectively we sustainably discharge wastewater for 1 million East Bay residents. It's the biggest infrastructure that nobody knows about, and we tend to like it that way. If we're not in the news, that means we're doing our job, but we have a couple of exciting projects that we're going to talk about today. And the origin of this system, it was originally called the Super Sewer, and this is an ad for the ballot measure that helped to fund this program. Each of the treatment plants along the Bay Shore used to discharge treated wastewater directly to the bay, and this system was created to transport that sewage through a 7-mile outfall into the deepest part of the bay where there's additional mixing. But we're returning to more of a near shore discharge approach in certain elements, and we'll talk about that later today. So we're going to start by talking about the Cargill partnership, and I'm going to turn it over to Don in a moment. Then we'll take some questions on that project when we get through the presentation, and then we'll move on to the horizontal levee project where I'll co-present with Heidi. So that's the run of show today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don for an explanation of the Cargill EBDA proposal for enhanced processing and removal of mixed sea salts.
Thank you, Jackie. I just thought I'd give just a broad overview. Some of you may not be aware of what Cargill does. They are a ag food financial company, also work in the industrial sector, have operations in about 125 countries. It is privately held. The company was formed in 1865. Mr. Cargill bought a grain elevator, and his descendants are the current owners of Cargill. So over 158 years, we've grown to 155,000 employees. And our purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And in fact, this project that I'm going to talk to you about is an example of that purpose. In the agricultural sector, we buy grains and oilseeds from farmers. The food, we supply food ingredients, sweeteners, texturizers. And animal nutrition and protein is we provide feed, we provide protein products, beef, chicken, turkey to food customers, and financial and industrial is where our sea salt business is actually part of the food business and the industrial business. So next slide. Then the one after that is that's an overview photo of our Newark salt ponds. And Cargill and our predecessor company, which we acquired the salt ponds from, Leslie Salt, have been operating those salt ponds for about 70 years. And that's about 12,000 acres that you're seeing there. And we're the only major solar sea salt, food grade solar sea salt facility in the US. Another product that we provide is road de-icing and dust suppressant products. And so we try to be good stewards in the Bay Area over the years. Leslie and Cargill have conveyed over 40,000 acres of shoreline property to federal and state agencies over the past 50 years. And the facility actually operates within the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. So we go to the next slide. So that is a brand that Cargill operates for their salt brand. We don't have a lot of direct to consumer brands, but this is one of them. So if you see Diamond Crystal Solar Sea Salt in the store, it probably came out of our Newark facility. So I thought I would, the next slide, kind of understand what the project is all about. I was just going to give a very high level overview of how you produce sea salt. It's a completely natural process. We only use the sun and the wind to evaporate seawater, which we pump in from the bay. So essentially where that X is, we bring in bay water and it moves through a series of ponds. The sun and the wind evaporate the water and the salinity increases. And then we move it to a next pond. And so it kind of goes through those kind of rose colored ponds until you get to those green colored ponds which we are called pickle ponds. And it's another name for increasing the salinity of those of the bay water that's in those ponds. And finally, those orange ponds is where we pump the brine into, and the sodium chloride will precipitate out most of it, and it will settle the bottom of the pond. We pump out the remaining brine and harvest the sea salt. So we circulate that what we've after the resulting brine or leftover brine, we circulate that through the system again. But another product that we then extract, which is in those aqua colored ponds, are mixed sea salts. These are all the salts that are still left after you've removed most of the sodium chloride. And from that inventory of mixed sea salts we can extract the last salt to really crystallize, which is magnesium chloride brine. And we use that for dust suppressant and for road de-icing purposes. It's been a very good product for us. So we now have this large inventory of these other mixed sea salts, which we've extracted. There's still some additional magnesium chloride, which we'll extract from those ponds. But we realize that after we get as much out, we probably aren't going to be able to commercialize the remaining mixed sea salts. So that's what this product is all about. And as you can see, those ponds are fairly close to the bay. And so as part of our sea level rise adaptation plan, we're looking at removing those mixed sea salts from those ponds. So how do you do that? Before the Clean Water Act, we would discharge brine back into the bay, but we're no longer allowed to do that. So why don't we go to the next slide? So again, this is part of our proactive sea level rise approach. Climate change, we realize, is going to impact all of us, and so we want to act before it becomes an issue. And so a part of our sea level rise adaptation adaptation plan is to remove those mixed sea salts. And since it's project or the process that we have is completely natural, we don't bring anything into those ponds that hasn't just come from bay water. So it's completely natural, but we don't want this large inventory of these highly concentrated salts sitting near the bay. So this is why we're partnering with EBDA to safely return those mixed sea salts back to the bay. We'll go to the next slide. You know, we looked at other options other than working with EBDA, and EBDA was clearly the most sustainable way of removing those mixed sea salts. I mean, we could have tried to truck it to a landfill or inject it into an underground well, or we looked at even putting it on a barge and sending it out, but that just none of those were really practical ways of removing the mixed sea salts. And the advantage of working with EBDA is that we've got to dilute these mixed sea salts before we discharge them into the bay. We've got a large supply of wastewater effluent that we can use to dilute the mixed sea salts and then return them out into the bay. Why don't we go to the next slide? So this is just a high level overview of what the product is all about. So it's where we will pump in some additional bay water in order to dissolve those mixed sea salts. We'll then send them through a pipeline that will connect with EBDA's wastewater effluent system. And then when it's mixed with all the wastewater effluent, it'll be diluted actually below the salinity of bay water. And then they can be safely discharged into the bay. And so the challenge is we've got to get those mixed sea salts to the EBDA system. And so what we want to do is build a pipeline from our facility in Newark. It's about 17 miles or so up to San Leandro, where we want to connect. And we're looking at having a project labor agreement to build the pipeline. And so essentially we'd be discharging 1 to 2 million gallons of brine to discharge year round. That's per day. And we would monitor water quality, and we estimate maybe be 10 to 15 years before we would essentially remove the mixed sea salts from those 2 ponds that I showed you on that previous map. We go to the next. So this is the map, and ideally you could just build that pipeline straight through up there and connect there, but that's not how it's going to work. So we just recently, we were looking at a city street route that would go through the cities of Newark, Fremont, Union City, and Hayward. And recently, so it required us under CEQA to prepare an environmental impact report for the project. And the report identified a city route street through public right-of-ways as the preferred alternative for construction. But as we continue to work and trying to actually the logistics of building that pipeline, working through other city projects, we've concluded that, you know, that really is an impractical way of routing the pipeline. It's really infeasible to do so. Some of the reasons would be, I mentioned some other construction projects going on, Union City Boulevard. They're putting in a bike lane and doing some road work. They wanted us to coordinate our project with theirs because they didn't, of course, want us coming in 2 or 3 years after they just got done redoing Union City Boulevard and having us tear the road back up again to install the brine pipeline. That was an issue that we were facing. And they want to start that project later this fall. So we don't have the permits in place. We were working with the other cities on the route and the franchise agreements. We're required to, if we're going to build in city right of ways, they require a franchise agreement with them. We were still working through that. We hadn't really started the permitting process yet. We had just concluded the environmental impact report, which was a precursor to being able to go out and actually apply for the permits. So we looked at all these issues and we started actually looking, how would you put this brine pipeline through city streets and avoid all the other utilities? We were finding that to be just an insurmountable challenge. And so what we decided is that what we want to do is look at a more western route that would avoid the developed areas of those cities. And that would allow us to kind of set our own timeline, get all the permits in place, all the agreements in place. We may have to cross a few city streets, but much less impactful to, I mean, there are 500,000 residents living in those 4 cities. So this would be much less impactful for them. The construction noise would not, would be much less building further to the west. So that's why we've decided to, even though the EIR was certified by EBDA just recently, we're going to move to a more western route, and we will be working with EBDA in order to, we'll have to do a supplement to the EIR with this new route that we're looking at. But we remain, the plan is still, Cargill remains fully committed to removing those mixed sea salts from those ponds, and certainly well in advance when sea level rise might be an issue. So the next slide would be just kind of our goals for the project. We wanted to work with EBDA. Like I said, they've got a large, ample wastewater effluent to use to dilute our brine. So that was ideal that we be working with them. And it's a perfectly sustainable way of removing it. We don't have truck traffic. We don't, all the greenhouse gas levels for this work, or this option is much less than anything else that we had looked at. So.
And so then a natural question is, well, what's in this for EBDA? We've been putting a lot of effort into working with Cargill on this project and carrying this EIR forward. And so the drivers for EBDA and the potential benefits to us for this partnership are, first of all, we'd be sustainably managing and discharging a waste that's generated within EBDA's service area, which is consistent with our mission. We'd also be utilizing excess capacity that's available in our existing infrastructure. Our pipe system is built to handle 189 million gallons per day, and on a typical dry weather day, we're only sending 50 to 60 million gallons per day through that system. So we have this excess capacity. What better way to use it than to work with Cargill to discharge these sea salts? We would receive financial compensation from Cargill for this. Sorry about that. And that would allow us to offset the money that's spent by our region's ratepayers on managing EBDA's infrastructure. We may benefit from new or improved infrastructure that would be more corrosion resistant. So the portions of our system that will be touched by the brine would be hardened such that they'd be more resistant to corrosion, and that's a benefit to the infrastructure overall. And then we see it as our mission to be stewards of the San Francisco Bay, and so supporting Cargill's efforts to improve resilience of the bay from sea level rise by facilitating removing these salts is consistent with our mission as well. Back to Don.
Thanks. This is just a list of we've tried to be very proactive in talking to agencies, certainly, but other groups out there, business organizations, elected officials, and then working with the building trades as well. So we very much appreciate putting a good word for EBDA. They've been terrific partners on this project, and we look forward to continuing to work with them on advancing this project.
So with that, we thought we'd pause and take questions on this project before we move into the other topic that we were going to cover today. So I see a question in the Q&A. How does this address the 4.9 foot sea rise risk by 2050 that's being planned for? Don, you want to take that?
Sure.
one?
Well, I mean, this is part of our sea level rise adaptation plan. I mean, the idea is that we will remove these mixed sea salts away from ponds that are near the bay. Again, these are natural salts, but of course they're concentrated, so you wouldn't want them just being dumped into the bay. So this project is part of Cargill sea level rise, and I'd say it's part of Cargill sea level rise adaptation plan. We've got others work that we're doing with the rest of the site in order to adapt to what those projections are saying, sea level rise and how high, how high our berms are that surround the pond. So this is exactly in line with what other other organizations and companies have to do that own property along the bay. So
See another related question: how will operations be able to continue with sea level rise? Will new berms be constructed?
no, we're working with the agencies on that. We operate under permits. The main agencies that permit us are BCDC, the Water Board, and the Army Corps of Engineers. So, like I said, there would be a whole other project around all the work that Cargill is doing around adapting to sea level rise. So whether that's raising the berms, again, that's we've looked at that as well. But right now, we've got plenty of the berms are high enough right now. We've got ample room before to do anything before it becomes an issue.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Jackie, I have a couple questions. Unfortunately, from my view, I can't put them in the Q&A. Actually, two questions for Don. One is just I was kind of curious about the pipe itself. Obviously the brine, the mixed sea salts, highly corrosive, and just wondered about the characteristics of the pipe.
Yeah, it's an HD.
HDPE.
Yeah,
HDPE.
HDPE. Yeah, so it doesn't corrode.
And what would the diameter of the pipe be?
We're looking at 18-inch pipe.
Yeah, just trying to get an idea. And
it'll be just so people understand. It's a pipe that's underground. It's not a pipe that's running through areas above ground. So.
And one other question. Obviously, this is the east side of the bay, and then you also have salt ponds on the west side of the bay. Do you encounter the same mixed sea salt?
No, we don't.
Yeah,
we removed the mixed sea salts from that facility some time ago. So we have the ability to move brine between the two facilities, but we don't have mixed sea salts. We don't have an inventory of mixed sea salts over on our ponds in Redwood City.
I see. Okay. There seem to be some more questions too. So.
Yeah. So has anyone looked at brine mining prior to disposal?
We've looked at all sorts of potential commercial opportunities, and actually the dust suppressant and the road de-icing product is an example of one of the commercial opportunities we were able to take with the mixed sea salt. So, and we continue to look at other potential commercial applications for those mixed sea salts. So, but the biggest success story has been the magnesium chloride brine, which works to, for road de-icing. It works to, we combine it with sodium chloride when you put it on the roads, and it ends up you can use less salt. It's more sustainable application of salt on the roads because you can use less of it. And then the dust suppressant, we put it on road, it absorbs moisture. So you put it on a road and it keeps the dust down. Again, it's been a very successful product for us, and that's, but we occasionally will have someone come to us and ask us about using those mixed sea salts or getting additional commercial product out of that inventory.
Next question is, will leak detection be part of plans for the new pipeline?
Absolutely. Yeah, we got further enough along with the design that that was part of the design plans that we would be able to determine whether there's a leak and know if it happened right away as well. So that's all part of the plan as well, and will continue to be as we move to a more western route.
And the next question, what is in the mixed sea salts? Are there other contaminants from the bay? I can start on that one. So I mean, everything that comes from the bay, ultimately the water evaporates, and so there are, you know, low levels of bay contaminants in material. But we've done pretty extensive testing, EBDA and Cargill in partnership, to make sure that when blended with the EBDA effluent, that we would be in compliance with EBDA's discharge permit and make sure that we are protecting the bay, because ultimately that's our mission. We don't want to add anything to our discharge that's going to have impact to the bay, and everything has come back clean. There haven't been any concerns. We're certainly going to continue to monitor and to make sure that that's the case. And we're also doing some evaluation of emerging contaminants, like cyanotoxins and PFAS, and, you know, just making sure we have a good characterization, but we don't anticipate any levels of concern in terms of other contaminants. What are the environmental ramifications of those commercial products, like the de-icing of the road salt?
Well, I mean, we're, like I said, part of what we do with our sodium chloride is that we operate under, you know, we sell, essentially what we do with our products that we sell to municipalities and states. And so, you know, they're responsible for making sure that they're following all environmental guidelines and rules. So that would probably be another, that'd be another session in itself, as far as using the how the cities and municipalities use our product. So
yeah, I think that answers the next question as well about the commercial products. Any other questions? Okay.
We are almost precisely at the 50-yard line here.
Right.
And so thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. If there are even more questions about the pipeline project after, we can deal with that as well. But it's time for Heidi Nutters and the First Mile project.
All right, so we are going to pivot now and talk about nature-based solutions for the East Bay shoreline. So Heidi's going to give an overview of what do we mean by nature-based solutions for sea level rise, and what's going on regionally. And then I'll talk a little bit about the case study of the horizontal levee project that EBDA is working on.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and good morning, everybody. So I'm Heidi Nutters. I'm Senior Program Manager with the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. And we've been working on nature-based solutions in the East Bay shoreline for many years with a really incredible group of partners, nonprofit, government, consulting firms that are really leading the way on innovation and forward-thinking approaches. So this is just to emphasize some of those partners that have been really instrumental. And I should mention our academic partners too at Renew It and UC Berkeley. This is some really long-standing work that is now moving forward, in part thanks to Jackie's forward-thinking approach with EBDA. So next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of framing the issues on nature-based adaptation in the San Francisco Bay, and then what that means, and then how we're thinking about that on the East Bay shoreline specifically. So this is a quote from Janine Benyus at the Biomimicry Institute that I find a huge source of inspiration for me is the work of biomimicry. So it says, what if every time I start to invent something, I asked, how would nature solve this? And I really think that that's at the heart of nature-based solutions, is really trying to understand natural systems and how they function and what services that they're able to provide, and then trying to mimic that in the way that we design our future infrastructure. Let's see. So what do we mean by nature-based solutions? Here's a couple of quotes. Nature-based solutions beneficially exploit natural processes, providing standalone solutions or hybrid approaches integrated with technology and engineering solutions to foster urban resilience and sustainability. And then, we can also think about nature-based solutions as multi-benefit projects, as places where we're trying to stack multiple functions and really maximize benefit, utilizing natural systems to improve our sea level rise resilience. And this can include, green approaches. There's always space for gray approaches. So it's not to say that we don't think that there's any parts of the shoreline that will require those traditional approaches, but we do look for nature-based approaches where we can. Next slide. So just taking that sort of concept into like sort of our policy and planning landscape today, that's informing why we're working to advance these solutions right now. We're really seeing an increasing urgency to advance our projects using innovative approaches. Climate change and other drivers of change create multiple stressors at once within our shoreline. And so really trying to maximize benefit is very urgent and pressing for decision makers today. And we do have multiple sources of regional guidance that really drive us towards these types of approaches. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership puts out the Estuary Blueprint, which is a roadmap for the health of the estuary and really emphasizes nature-based approaches. And then BCDC led the Bay Conservation and Development Commission led a multi-stakeholder process called Bay Adapt, which put out a joint platform for strategies for the future of our rising bay and really emphasize nature-based approaches. We also have state and federal guidance, including President Biden's executive order, really emphasizing, seeing these nature-based approaches as the default. We want to start there and see what we can do before moving to kind of traditional gray infrastructure approaches. Next slide. This is a schematic that sort of talks about what that can look like in reality on the shoreline. So, what we have on the left is sort of a conventional levee and a seawall. So the image that you're seeing is a wastewater treatment plant facility with a traditional seawall that is then protected with riprap on the bayward side and then going out into the water from there. This conventional approach is susceptible to failure as it's not able to dissipate wave action all of the time. And it's only serving one function. And it, generally speaking, it's doing it pretty well. It's protecting that infrastructure behind the seawall. But a horizontal levee solution is able to do that in certain locations while also providing other benefits and perhaps even having a more resilient sort of system for protection. So this is the horizontal levee. And Jackie's going to be talking about this a lot more in terms of how that's being carried out on the shoreline. I think if you click through a couple more slides, so it still has that same existing levee, that same flood protection system, but it's supporting that with native vegetation that can provide that wave attenuation and really handle the shocks to the system. And it's also that vegetation obviously is providing habitat for native species. It's improving our water quality. In a horizontal levee in particular, we're also using this water treatment layer that goes below ground. So it's also providing a benefit to that wastewater treatment plant by allowing it to discharge the treated wastewater down below ground through the system and then out into the bay and improving water quality in the process. And as Jackie's going to talk about, these below ground treatment systems have a higher level of treatment and removal of contaminants than we see in traditional wastewater treatment for things like nutrients and contaminants of emerging concern. Next slide. So that's horizontal levees. And really, when we think about what this kind of boils down to, it's really reimagining wastewater as a resource rather than something that we're just discharging out into, through a pipeline, which, like I said, in itself is providing value. But, when we're thinking about every inch of the shoreline really being critical to be thinking about, we can reimagine that as a resource in certain areas. So a source of fresh water for resilient shoreline, drought-proof water supply, and also, like I mentioned, the ability of wetlands to provide this additional level of treatment before it's going out into our bay, which is really beneficial, especially if you think about the fish die-offs that happened, in recent years, and some of the impacts of nutrients on our estuary. Next slide. It's also reimagining wetlands as a place for people and nature. Wetlands provide so many benefits to our communities. And so it's really trying to maximize that and maximize the genius design of nature to provide these benefits to our communities. So really thinking about community and tribal benefits, protection from climate-related hazards, and also future-proofing for nature. Next slide. So in the thick of it, in the thick of trying to bring all of these great concepts down to the shoreline and developing projects, we are working very closely with the partners I showed in that opening slide, as well as many others, on some of these key implementation challenges. These are designs that are not the default, they're not the status quo, and a lot of our systems are not necessarily designed for them yet. And so we're really trying to think through some of these implementation challenges right now. The first one that I have there is speed and scale. So just knowing that these types of projects really require agencies to be thinking about and buying into benefits that maybe are not within their scope. Maybe they've been providing public access and now they're suddenly thinking about protecting infrastructure or water quality or hydrology or different components that have not traditionally been within their scope. When we're thinking about stacking these functions together, we really have to have a highly collaborative approach to really bring all of these folks together. So it's a massive coordination challenge just to get to the speed and the scale of adaptation that we're going to need to adapt to climate change on our shoreline. The regulatory challenges are also something that we're working on in close partnership with our regulatory agencies. And again, as I said, these our regulations are not designed exactly for this unknown future that we're now in and moving into in the future. So we really understand that we have to think differently about, if we're placing fill on a wetland to have it keep up and protect that infrastructure behind it. That might not be something that the regulations were originally intended to even respond to. So these are conversations that we're having currently, we're very engaged in, really thinking about the long-term net benefits of these kinds of projects and how we need to approach permitting for them. There's also governance challenges. So really thinking about zoning and land use and organizational arrangements. There's many innovative models and there's a lot of incredible work going on in the Bay around this. And so we're engaged in that. And then also really emphasizing keeping communities at the center. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is respond to the needs of communities on the ground in a particular place. So their voices are crucial to helping drive the conversation around the kinds of benefits or priorities that we're seeking in a particular area. And we particularly want to center the voices of marginalized communities, of tribes, of underrepresented folks in the conversation. So in the midst of the three things that I've listed above, we also have to remember that the priorities of our community are front and center. Next slide. I think this is my last one. I wanted to just emphasize that Amidst all of those challenges, there's a lot of incredible work going on to address those challenges and for us to move forward. So much of this work is already underway. The Bay Conservation and Development Commission are kicking off the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plan, and BCDC, as well as the Metropolitan Transportation Commission / ABAG, Association of Bay Governments, recently put out a funding and investment framework that lays out the bottom line cost for green and gray approaches across our bay to protect from sea level rise. We have a project at SFVP called the Regulatory Pathways for Nature-Based Solutions, which we're working with many partners to really dive into those regulatory questions. We're also really interested in sort of the sub-regional scale for advancing these types of projects at something called the Operational Landscape Unit, which is really a unit that's defined by the natural sort of landscape systems, sort of nature's boundaries, and really beginning to plan at that scale and really allowing us to address some of those governance and permitting challenges at a more holistic scale. And I've listed 3 places where that work is kicking off around the region. And then we have several pilot projects. We have the Loma horizontal levee and the first mile horizontal levee that Jackie will talk in more depth about. And since Dennis put up that press release from EPA, I'll also mention that we just received funding for construction of the Palo Alto horizontal levee, so a different part of the shoreline. But that will be the first time that we're actually directly conveying that treated wastewater out through a treatment zone in a wetland out into the bay. So that's a huge step in our innovation. And we expect construction of that next year. So that's something that we can all look forward to. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Jackie to talk a little bit in more depth about this stuff.
Thanks, Heidi. So what you're looking at here is the Loma treatment plant and the Loma effluent pump station that belong to EBDA. Also, I should have noted behind me is EBDA's outfall, that same outfall that we are going to be discharging Cargill's brine through and that our wastewater flows through. And so I'm going to talk about a project that we've been working on to implement the solutions that Heidi just talked about. So first I'll touch a little bit on the horizontal levee demonstration project, and many of you may be familiar with this project, but I'm going to go kind of from the beginning for those that aren't. I will also offer that I have my contact information at the end of this slide deck, and if folks are interested, we are happy to give tours of the demonstration project to really allow folks to see it firsthand and get a better understanding of what we're talking about. So feel free to reach out if you're interested in coming to see it. So this is the Loma wastewater treatment plant located in San Lorenzo that discharges generally through the EBDA system. But a portion of that effluent is diverted to this wetland treatment basin and the horizontal levee demonstration. This is a pilot scale facility that we really use as a living laboratory to test some of the treatment concepts that that we've been talking about with the horizontal levee, so that we can do it in an experimental setting, so that when we start to build up to full scale, which we'll talk about more in a moment, that we have a better scientific understanding. And so the work at the horizontal levee demonstration has been primarily carried out by Dr. David Sedlak at UC Berkeley and his students. So there's the horizontal levee demonstration, and here's what it looks like in practice. This was taken a few years ago, and the vegetation has changed a bit in the interim. But what you're looking at is actually a series of individual cells. Again, this is part of the experimental design. It was created with these different cells so that we could test different types of vegetation and different types of substrate. When we say substrate, I mean what's below the vegetation that we're actually filtering the water through to achieve treatment. So we have fine substrates, coarse substrates, different cells with willows, cells with other native wetland plants, to try to understand where we would see the best treatment of wastewater through the system. So what we do is we put influent, which is actually the effluent from the wastewater treatment plant. So it's secondary treated wastewater that goes into these cells at the top end of a 30-to-1 slope. And then it goes out and the wastewater is collected and sent back to the treatment plant. So this is purely an environmental system. It's not currently connected to the bay, but it allows us to study. So in terms of the subsurface design, as I said, we put secondary treated nitrified wastewater into the subsurface zone below the plants. We have fine substrate with native plant growth. We have coarse substrate where we've amended it with wood chips to facilitate biological action, basically the microbes treating the wastewater. And we try to get the wastewater to flow through that subsurface to achieve treatment. And I didn't want this to be a scientific presentation, but I thought this graphic explains a lot in terms of what's been found through this research. So what you're looking at here is the nitrogen levels, specifically nitrate. Heidi mentioned there's been a lot of focus on nutrient discharges to the bay in light of the algal bloom that we had last summer. And we've been focused for a long time at looking at what is the role of nutrients from wastewater discharges in the potential for eutrophication or other impacts to the bay. So this is a solution that is incredibly effective at removing nutrients. So when we start out at 0.0, so the upper end of the, right here at the upper end of the treatment zone, you can see the nitrogen just, if it's in the subsurface, it just immediately goes to 0, basically, as it goes along the length of the horizontal levee. So it's incredibly effective at removing nitrate. If the water flows over through the plants, like where the red dots are here, we don't see that removal. So really the action is in the subsurface. So the nitrate is removed within 1/5 of the built capacity. And so that has implications for how we build this in the future. And organic carbon amendments can sustain denitrification for over 50 years. So that's one of the questions that we've been working to answer is, how long will these systems last and what sort of O&M operations and maintenance efforts might be required to sustain the results. So what we concluded from those first phases of work is that the horizontal levee may be able to handle higher contaminant loads because it's so effective. And so the new direction that the UC Berkeley team has been working on, partnering with Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center, which is a water purification project being implemented by Valley Water, is putting reverse osmosis concentrate into the system. So when you purify wastewater to a potable standard, you put it through reverse osmosis, you get about 85% out as pure water, and then all the contaminants are in the remaining 15%. And what do you do with that reverse osmosis concentrate is a really important question in the future of water recycling. So this is one potential solution to that. We can put the RO concentrate into the system and you can see the nitrate results are almost as good as when we put the treated effluent in. So we have rapid removal of nitrate. We also have removal of pharmaceuticals, which is another important consideration in what do we do with that concentrate. And right now they're in the process of testing metals and understanding the fate of metals in the horizontal levee. So this shows a lot of promise as a tool for managing reverse osmosis concentrate. So what's next is what we're calling Horizontal Levee 2.0. So with state grant funding in partnership with San Francisco Estuary Partnership again, we are redesigning some of the cells, basically ripping out the first 3 cells and testing new things in this living laboratory. So things that are going to be tested in this next phase, and this is what it looks like under construction. This was taken about a month ago. We're testing a steeper slope. One of the challenges with horizontal levees is scale. So the first mile project that we're going to talk about in a moment is a mile of levee, and we think we could only put about 500,000 gallons of wastewater through that. And that the Loma treatment plant, as an example, processes about 11 million gallons per day. So we need to find ways to tighten up the space requirements. And one way of doing that is by increasing the slope. And we think that that will be successful given that most of the treatment happens in that first portion anyway. We're also testing different treatment zone thicknesses. The thicker the treatment zone, the more expensive it can be and the more maintenance that might be required. So we're testing different ways of configuring the treatment zone to try to make it more cost effective. And then we're also trying to augment the treatment zone in certain cells with a product called Fluorosorb that is intended for PFAS removal, and really understanding the fate of PFAS in the horizontal levee. So that's what we're learning from the research. Then the question is, how do we scale this up? And so what you're seeing in this image, you can ignore the numbers, they relate to something different, but this is the current demonstration site. And this site here, this area is called Loma Marsh. It's located just south of the Loma treatment plant. And this is the site for what we're calling the first mile, because the idea would be it would be the first mile of shoreline that would be adapted as a horizontal levee. As Heidi mentioned, this work is going on around the bay. So before I dive into the first mile, just note that there's a regional study that was recently prepared and will be submitted actually today or tomorrow to the Regional Water Board, looking at opportunities for wastewater agencies to partner on wetland and horizontal levee opportunities for nutrient removal specifically. And so there was a desk-based study that looked at the potential of each dot is a wastewater treatment plant around the bay, and this denotes, high potential for nature-based solutions for nutrient removal versus low potential. And then there have been follow-up efforts with those sites that have high potential, including the EBDA sites located here, looking more specifically at potential projects. So the first mile horizontal levee, as I mentioned, this is just south of the Loma treatment plant. And again, another image, here's the treatment plant, here's the horizontal levee demonstration, and here's the site where we are looking to build the first mile. And just a word of thanks to the San Francisco Bay Water Quality Improvement Fund. I know there's been a lot of press in the past couple of days actually about the influx of additional monies to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. We're really excited about that, and that EPA funding has been instrumental to moving these concepts forward, working with SFEP. This project is also happening in the context of a regional master plan. So what you're seeing here is the Hayward Regional Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan that was developed for the Hayward Area Shoreline Planning Agency, or HASPA. The project that we're talking about here is here in this Loma Marsh area, but as you can see, there's a coordinated effort to look at a combination of gray and green infrastructure solutions to adapt the shoreline. And this was a really great process that engaged stakeholders and the public in the weighing the different benefits and trade-offs around habitat creation, recreation, where should the Bay Trail go through this area as sea level rises, and how can we protect critical infrastructure like the wastewater treatment plants. So a really good exercise to come up with this master planned concept. So the first mile project itself would consist of a horizontal levee that's shown here, and The water source could either be treated wastewater from Loma, which was the original concept, or potentially stormwater from the surrounding areas that otherwise wouldn't be treated. And we would manage it for habitat benefits, trying to mimic natural subsurface hydrology, like Heidi was talking about, that biomimicry concept. We'd also be looking at widening Sulphur Creek in the south, and converting some of the upland to marsh areas. So this is the levee design, and you can see it kind of shows what Heidi was showing in the drawing earlier. We'd have this levee core and then the gentle slope towards the baylands. One of the things that we're looking at is making it adaptable to sea level rise. So building it at kind of this level to begin with, but with an ability by the end of the century to increase the height as needed. So some of the benefits: we would expand upland and transitional habitats for endangered species, provide flood protection for San Lorenzo and Hayward behind the levee, provide stormwater treatment and or wastewater polishing, and sea level rise adaptation. What's unique about these solutions versus a seawall is they grow with sea level rise, is kind of the idea. So it allows the marsh to transgress upslope, but with sediment deposits over time as the sea level rises, building organic soils to keep pace with sea level rise. So some of the challenges, and I'm going through this quickly because I'm watching the clock here, but there are a lot of challenges to getting something done. And I like this land use graphic because I think it illustrates that nothing is simple along the shoreline. So you can see the mix of land ownership in the area that we're proposing to build this. Most of it is owned by, and all of it is managed by, East Bay Regional Parks District. So they've been a key partner in this project. But you've also got State of California land, and right behind is Hayward Area Recreation District, City of Hayward. You've got some federal land. It's a mashup, and so having all these partners work together is critical to success. Historical uses: we have an area here that's dedicated as a mitigation wetland for a previous project by the Port of Oakland, so we need to consider that. There are permitting challenges and mitigation requirements. So when you fill in an existing wetland, even if it's to protect that wetland from sea level rise in the future, there's still, under current regulations, the requirement to mitigate for that. So I'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. There's stormwater that needs to be managed through or around the levee, and then who, in this mix of partners, who would be responsible for operations and maintenance. So I'm going to go through this next set of slides quickly because it's basically an animation. But if one of the challenges from a regulatory standpoint is our regulations are really set up for protecting current habitat. They're not really set up for protecting something that will be inundated in the future. And that's been one of the challenges. Is what we want to do is fill current wetland to save it into the future and to provide habitat for those endangered species. But our regulations don't allow us to fill in a current, high quality habitat without mitigating for that. And so we're trying to illustrate that what we're doing will ultimately provide net benefit in the future to the wetland area, and getting the regulators to think on those different timescales. So the existing condition: no sea level rise. These are the different types of habitats, and you can see with sea level rise, the habitats are going to change with or without us. This is the no project alternative. With the project, then you have a little more yellow. You have a little more upland habitat for those critters. So the net habitat that's impacted is 12.8 acres in this case, and that's what we would be required to mitigate unless we can find some framework for considering future conditions. So because the first mile project's not permittable in its current form due to the wetland impacts, we're looking at expanding the scope to include some mitigation adjacent. So the master plan that I showed earlier identified these locations called Franks West and Franks East that are ripe for future restoration. And so we're looking at incorporating, moving those restoration projects up in time to pair them with the first mile project and provide an offset. Otherwise, we'd be looking at, you know, potentially almost $1 million an acre to mitigate for the impact, which really makes the project cost infeasible because the project itself is expensive and challenging to fund. If you add the mitigation, it just drags it down. So in terms of the next steps for this project, we are in the process of completing the 30% design. ESA is the consultant that's working on that design. We're also working with another consultant, Nate Kaufman, to develop renderings that will really allow stakeholders to better visualize the project, understand what it will look like and feel like. And we're hoping that really helps with these conversations about the impacts versus the benefits. We're progressing these mitigation concepts at the sites to the south that I mentioned, continuing to work with the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, or BRIT, on the permitting questions and challenges, and also using this as an example as we worked through some of the broader regulatory discussions and regulatory pathways project that Heidi mentioned. We're also developing a leadership and governance strategy. EBDA has been the champion of this project as a benefit to the Bay and the East Bay shoreline and protecting our infrastructure and improving water quality. But at the end of the day, it probably doesn't make sense for EBDA to be the entity that builds this. It's not in our core scope. And so who should be the entity to build it, and what sorts of partnerships are needed in order to get this project implemented and to agree to the operations and maintenance responsibilities. And in order to move all of this forward, we are looking at seeking grant funding for the next phase. Our current grant funding goes through the end of this year and kind of allows us to complete the 30% design and a few of these other pieces. So Heidi touched on this, but one concept for the future of wastewater management is you have wastewater effluent that could be put through reverse osmosis process. Then you have purified water that becomes a potable water source. And the RO concentrate would go through a horizontal levee or other nature-based solution. So this is one vision of how wastewater could be used as a resource in the Bay Area and beyond. There's a lot of moving parts we didn't touch on in this presentation, but including the purified water piece. But this is just one piece that allows us to achieve multiple benefits for our shoreline. So I rushed through a little bit of that so that we could have time for questions, but happy to go back to anything and answer what questions folks might have on this project. So let's see.
Yeah, Jackie, I think be good to go through the Q&A. There's 4 Q&A submissions.
So the first question that I see on this project is, could the below ground treatment layers that Heidi mentioned as part of nature-based solutions address chlorides? Concerned about saltwater intrusion into groundwater due to sea level rise. Potentially, what we've been looking at in the horizontal levee is a saline environment or an estuary environment. So using native plants that would already be found along the shoreline, and the water that we're putting in there, even if it's reverse osmosis concentrate, which is pretty salty, it's still lower salt than bay water. Whether you could use a tool like this to sort of filter the salt before it gets to groundwater is an interesting question. And I don't know if that's been studied. I don't know if Heidi has any thoughts on that. Yeah.
Jackie, actually a follow-up question I had, in terms of Loma, the pilot project and what is envisioned with the first mile. This, you talk about native plants,
Mhm.
but these are not like adulterated native plants, like it isn't a phytoremediation issue or anything, right? This is kind of off the shelf, if you will, native plants.
Yeah, so actually for the demonstration site, we had a partnership with Save the Bay that actually developed a nursery of native plants from the Bay region specifically to plant in this environment. So they're native plants, they haven't been modified in any way other than to, you know, cultivate their initial planting. They've really thrived in the environment. One of the lessons learned from the project has been that we wouldn't need to plant as densely as was done. The willow cells currently, you got to take a machete with you to go in there because they've grown so well. Really, the treatment is happening in the subsurface layer, not by the plants themselves. It's happening in the soil, and the UC Berkeley team has done some really interesting work looking at those mechanisms, but the plants are just sort of creating the environment. Next question I see is how much funds is Cargill providing for these horizontal levees? So these projects are not currently connected. So Cargill has not provided funding directly for these projects. I mean, part of the benefit to EBDA of working with Cargill, as I mentioned, is there would be a financial transaction, and that could, you know, those funds flowing to EBDA could be used potentially to help our member agencies armor their facilities, whether through nature-based solutions or otherwise, to sea level rise, but there's no direct linkage.
Could a quick comment, perhaps Don, on the pipeline project financing?
Cargill is financing this project on their own. We're not seeking any state grants. This is a significant investment for the company. So.
Good point.
Okay. Can you talk more about how you're doing community outreach? And I assume by the time of this question, it's about the horizontal levee project. I'll let Heidi speak a bit to that, and then I can add on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the community outreach that we're doing, it's very specific to the place. So we often partner with community-based organizations, you know, that are located next to or around the wastewater treatment plants. It's always great to partner with the wastewater treatment plants because they often, you know, they're good neighbors that are situated within a particular place and have long-standing relationships with the community that they're located within. So we really try to do that. We really try to work with the CBOs that are local to make sure that we're providing funding to them, if whether it might be for providing tours of the site, providing educational material, we're reaching out to, you know, the constituents within that community organization to let them know about the project. We find that it's really beneficial to do consultation as early as possible with community partners. And I say as early as possible because I think it's important that we don't overpromise on projects. These types of projects are often, you know, they can start out one way and then shift over time as we understand the complex land ownership that Jackie showed in that map and other conditions on the site. So we want to make sure that we're not going to communities and promising something if the project is going to change over time. So once we have a good sense of the alignment of a project, that's a great time to start working with communities, getting their input, hearing from them what benefits would be meaningful to them. It's always great to, like I said, link it to educational opportunities or working with youth. We love to have Save the Bay come out and lead planting efforts to really all of the plants that we talked about at Loma. Those were all planted by community members that was led by Save the Bay. So it's really every place that we see the opportunity, we try to take it to partner with community groups. What would you add to that, Jackie?
Yeah, I think that's great. Specific to the First Mile project, to date, we've relied on the outreach that was done as part of the master plan, because really this project is in the context of that master plan, and there was a pretty extensive effort to engage the community and stakeholder groups as part of that master plan process. I think as we move into the next phase of the project, one of the reasons we're developing these new renderings and drawings is to use those as tools to engage the community as we move forward. I think we need to figure out a few of these governance questions before we do a lot more outreach, because we need to figure out who's going to build the project and be able to, communicate that to the public. But it's, I think we would build on all the things that Heidi and her team have learned in other locations. I see one more question. Can you explain how the heavy metals that the plants absorb are handled in the long term? And that's one of the research questions that the UC Berkeley team is looking at right now in the demonstration site. My understanding is that that the contaminants that they've studied to date have not been absorbed into the plants in appreciable quantities, that they're converted to other more benign compounds in the subsurface, and so plant uptake hasn't been a big issue. I think they want to study that in particular to metals and understand that, and if there's some periodic harvesting that needs to be done of the plants in order to make sure that we're not bioaccumulating metals in a harmful way, then that would be a learning that we could take forward.
And shout out to Tess Byler for sending that link with the Shoreline Adaptation Master Plan. I guess it was a City of Hayward link. And the picture features the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center, which I have to admit I've never visited, and I always pass it by going, oh, I need to go back there. So I'm taking note that to actually visit that, and also perhaps talk to Spur about co-producing an Loma tour, kind of like we did recently with the Valley Water Advanced Purification District in Alviso. We did a tour there, as well. So it's good. It's good weather to get out and look at these really, very good examples of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue, because the Valley Water folks are actually trucking the concentrate from that advanced purification facility to Loma for testing. So if you come out to Loma, you'll see the tanks where they're storing Valley Water's concentrate.
A couple comments on the chat. We've gone through the Q&A. Erik Desormeaux made a note of magnesium potential, which was kind of an interesting thing. And I've been looking a lot at battery formulations, and the hottest thing these days is everyone's talking about salt batteries replacing lithium. So who knows if that is something that would be useful for salt water. And then lastly, I did put in a link about Loma. I think there's been a couple links about Loma's horizontal levee project, and a silly picture of David Sedlak, because he's among other things, he's the leader of the circus as far as a lot of this, the thought leader of a lot of this, and is one of the coolest professors ever, let's face it. And by the way, there was mention of fluorosorb. And if people really want to get into the weeds, I tried to send stuff about fluorosorb, and I've long been, as a non scientific person, I still have been fascinated by adsorption with a D versus absorption. And so it has all kinds of different properties. So I put some links in there about that. And then lastly, my favorite link is this Bill McKibben article where he comes out as a YIMBY and and bridges the traditional environmentalist, and in this case, housing kind of issue. But as Heidi was talking about, being flexible about solutions and problem solving. And for instance, Jackie, you were mentioning the issues where all the regulation is about, say, protecting wetlands, but it kind of gets in the way of, what you were doing, and kind of working that out. So this is this article by McKibben, I think, is a real gets to that issue about looking at what needs to be done and what tools we have and how we can achieve that.
Very cool. And I'll just mention real quickly, Dennis, that Cargill and EBDA have had preliminary conversations with Magrathea on the magnesium. So that is a conversation that's happening as well.
Great. Well, we are, and mainly this has to do with my not being as involved as normal, that we are kind of on time. But thank you, Jackie, for really being in the center of all this. And thanks to Don and Heidi, and these projects are really just compelling. And I'm really glad that we could take some time today, a time that I think went very quickly to get through these. So any last words?
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Well,
Dennis.
we will put this out, and a lot of even the chat links and everything else, but we'll put this out on YouTube, and it'll be in the notes, all the good chat stuff as well. And we'll follow up. So because these projects are not going to be finished tomorrow. They're an ongoing thing, but it's a really good to see see this work and the progress getting done.
Great. Thank you.
All right. We'll have a very good Thursday before Friday holiday weekend. And thanks again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.